What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic DFS channel. And today we're talking USFL Week 2 DFS picks. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. And don't forget to sign up for the Stochastic Hall of Fame by changing your avatar on DraftKings and FanDuel to the logo. First, all you have to do is download the Stochastic avatar from stochastic.com/avatar, plays in the top 3 of any DFS contest with at least 5,000 entrants, and then tweet your wins at Stochastic HOF or email us with a screenshot. Then you'll win a free month and you'll get shouted out on our weekly Hall of Fame segment. And shout out to the sponsor of the show, us. We have a promo going on for a lot of the site, but you can get 50% off your first week of USFL DFS when you use the promo code SCORE. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about that later because we've got some cool things going on for DFS. But let's get into week 2 DFS. Couple just large takeaways about DFS in the USFL before we get into the game-by-game and team-by-team analysis. I think a lot of what we saw play out in week 1 came to fruition. A lot of the NFL guys ended up outperforming the players that were formerly locked into depth chart roles last year. But a couple things I noticed, and the main thing that pertains to this video is injury reporting. It was actually pretty good. The only issue is it comes out really late. We were seeing injuries come out on Friday and Saturday. And, for the shelf life of this video, it just has to be recorded earlier. So I want to qualify what we talk about in this video. There's going to be information that changes the plays. Even more reason to follow us on the site. We're updating projections constantly. I write a monster written piece that I do update throughout the weekend, depending on those inactives. But it's good. They come out late, but just kind of hurts the video. But with that said, let's go right into the analysis. Bring you to DraftKings as the backdrop. As usual, we've been doing team by team, game by game. So we'll kick things off here with Houston. And they're actually fresh off a loss in week 1. They lost 29-13 to the Michigan Panthers. They were 5th in plays per game, and they were the team that passed the ball the least in the league. It was a pretty poor performance. Their defense was not great. They allowed 9.1 yards per pass attempt. That was worst in the league. Their offensive line allowed 4 sacks, and they only averaged 3.7 yards per play, which was downright horrific. And the only reason they scored a touchdown is Michigan muffed a punt that gave Houston the ball on the 17-yard line. Currently, they're 6.5-point underdogs to the New Orleans Breakers in the game with a 38.5 total. So you can tell they have one of the lowest implied team totals. But when we go to DFS, we have Kenji Bahar as the quarterback. He's cheap at 7.8K here. And he didn't have a terrible performance. It could have been much better for Bahar. But some of the negatives with his game, he fumbled once. That was a strip sack. He threw 2 interceptions. One of them was just a pass that TJ Pledger just batted right into the air that the defense intercepted. So not all his fault. You need a little context here, but still his efficiency metrics weren't great. 59% completion percentage, 4.95 yards per attempt isn't good, but he still looks fairly mobile, rushed 2 times for 11 yards. And I think he's going to handle most of the snaps. We saw a bit of a cameo from Terry Wilson, but I don't think that's going to continue. Again, a lot of Kenji's mistakes weren't necessarily his fault. But he's still pretty hard to stack. And the run game is a place I think we could maybe look instead of playing Kenji or stacks of the offense. I'll sum up this by saying I think he's live for tournaments still, even with the timeshare. He should be extremely low owned. Tough matchup. New Orleans is a good defense. We'll get to that in a second. At running back, we didn't see Mark Thompson, so this is a perfect example of I filmed an entire video last week assuming Mark Thompson would be the bell cow, and then he was ruled inactive. And as usual, I don't know if he's going to be activated or if any of these players that were out might be. So this is something you'll have to watch. But the game started off as nearly a 50-50 timeshare between TJ Pledger and Devois Whaley until we saw Devois Whaley lose a fumble. And then from there, it was basically the TJ Pledger show throughout. And that caused him to have like a really good workload in this league. When you look and see his ultimate touch count, 16 carries, 5 targets, super inefficient, but that's an awesome workload. He outtouched Devois Whaley 18-7. Again, I'm not sure it would have been this wide had Devois Whaley not fumbled, But worth noting here, Pledger, he should be pretty good play here regardless, even at his price. And as an underdog, 5 targets keeps him involved in the pass game and gives him a good floor. Don't think Whaley is in consideration at all. Wouldn't be surprised if he's inactive, assuming Thompson's better. At receiver, you can see who was ruled out for this team last week. This was one of the teams that used a pretty nasty rotation at the receiver position. Josh Patterson led the group with 23 yards, so that tells you how bad it was. And Pledger actually led the team in targets, which was interesting here. So right away, I think this is a tough situation to dissect. You had 3 tight ends active. Patterson, again, led the team in receiving yards, but he also split time with Brandon Barnes and Clint Sig Jr. They didn't have a target, but they were both out there plenty. Receiver was Justin Hall, Kiki Chisholm, Teo Redding, Anthony Ratliff Williams. They all had 3 targets. And these guys were just essentially being deployed in groups. You would see like the group of Hall, Chisholm, and Patterson out there one drive. And then the next drive, it would be Redding, Williams, and Clint Sig Jr. They were literally just rotating drives for these guys. So I think it's going to be pretty nasty rotation. And they also allegedly signed Isaiah Zuber again to add some juice to this team. He was with the team last year, led the team in receiving, but they now have a different coach. So I don't know if he's going to be up to speed right away. This is something to monitor throughout the week. If it was the same head coach, I would say probably slides right in, but not sure on Zuber's status. He's not in the player pool either, so we'll have to see if he gets added. I don't plan on playing much of these guys. If I do, it's going to be the Kiki Chisholms, the really cheap guys. Not really too much interest in this receiving core. I think I'd rather play Bahart naked because of the rushing or just use Pledger. Going to New Orleans, second highest team total on the board. This team has a lot of juice. In their week 1 game, they looked awesome. They played the Pittsburgh Maulers. They beat them 22-15. The Breakers were first in plays per game and pass rate. Defense was also awesome. First in yards per pass allowed. 6th in yards per carry. You'll live with that. Dominated the trenches. And this team is basically building off a defense last year that was first in the league in yards per allowed. And then overall, the Maulers, they scored 15 points, but they did so with a defensive touchdown and a special teams touchdown. So this score could have even been wider in favor of the Breakers here. Breakers dominated yards per play, and now their team total is awesome on this slate. Getting to the skill position players, McLeod Bethel Thompson, is their quarterback. CFL veteran, 2-time champion up there. Really good week 1. 56% completion percentage. Could be better. 7.4 yards per attempt. Not bad. But 302 yards. Excuse me. I was sick for a while. Now the allergies are here. Bethel Thompson, while the efficiency is not great, he plays in one of these offenses with number 1 pass rate, number 1 plays per game. That's just naturally going to backdoor you to awesome fantasy performance. Think like Ben DiNucci in the XFL. With an offense like this, he should immediately be considered a top 3 quarterback option, even at this price. He's not the most mobile, but he did rush 4 times for 16 yards. Bethel Thompson, I think, firmly deserves to be in play. And one other thing, a lot of these quarterback rooms are timeshares. He's locked in. No timeshare whatsoever here. At the running back position, it was basically the Anthony Jones show. Inefficient, but holy smokes, he was the only player in this backfield to receive a touch. He carried 19 times for 46 yards. Again, inefficient, but man, that's a ton of carries. And he also had 8 targets. He caught 6 of them for 25 yards and a score. If he sees this workload, this is the best role in the entire USFL. He doesn't really have a lot of competition either. Ezra Gray was inactive. Wes Hills, again, didn't see the field much. Anthony Jones this week should be number 1 or number 2 in terms of running back rankings. There's another guy I think that's debatable with him, but Jones is a rock solid play. And this receiving room is sick too. They essentially did not rotate whatsoever, contrary to what the Houston Gamblers did. It was essentially Johnny Dixon, Jonathan Adams, and Sage Surratt on the field. And then Lee Morris played ahead of Eli Stove as the 3 and 4. They're running 4 wide quite a bit. Surratt will play in the slot. And these guys had a very condensed opportunity share. Johnny Dixon had 11 targets. He only caught 3 of them. Better days are ahead for him. You saw Jonathan Adams, 5 catches on 6 targets for 70 yards. Really efficient. Surratt had 9 targets. Caught 5 of them for 85 yards. That's all awesome. And Lee Morris had 3 targets 3 catches on 4 targets for 51 yards. He'd be a cheap wide receiver 3 option. I think Surratt is the guy you prefer straight up here, but for those of you getting a little contrarian, you could definitely play Lee Morris instead of Surratt in the large field tournaments. Even Eli Stove, 3 targets. Like, you could play him at the Stone Min here. I'm going to be stacking this team and trying to play as many breakers as I can across lineups, mixing and matching them, sometimes stacking Bethel Thompson with really any of the top 5, and sometimes just playing Anthony Jones as a one-off here. This is a great offense to target, not only because of the implied team total, but because it's so condensed. Second game, Memphis takes on Birmingham. Birmingham, the champions last year. We'll start on the Memphis side. This team kicked off their USFL season with a 27-23 loss to the Stars. They were 4th in plays. They were 2nd in pass rate. Their defense was about average, 5th in pass yards per attempt allowed. And then they were 4th in yards per attempt allowed on the ground. They did dominate the trenches, had 5 sacks. They didn't allow any themselves. And they outgained Philly in terms of yards per play. They had 5.4 yards per play, Philadelphia 4.8. They ended up missing a field goal and threw an interception at the Philadelphia 22, which was the deciding factor in a hyper close game. So they probably could have won this, honestly. Now they're 7.5-point underdogs to Birmingham. The total is 44.5. We'll continue here with the quarterback position. They did use 2 players. We saw Brady White and Cole Kelly. It was mostly Brady White out there, and he played fine. 55% completion, 6.3 yards per attempt, 2 scores, and an interception. He actually rushed 4 times for 25 yards, which wasn't really in his bag previously. So I don't know if this is something that's just a blip on the radar. But I think Brady White played well enough to hold off Cole Kelly and maybe play a whole game next week. So he's in the GPP category for me. Not much efficiency, not much rushing ability. And maybe we still see Cole Kelly. So he's not a guy I want to hitch my wagon to this weekend. In the backfield, I think this is another situation where we have a complete bell cow. Alex Collins, you know him from the NFL. He dominated touches, and this was predictable. 14 carries for him, 9 targets, caught 5 of them. That is a monster role. David Ham as the backup only saw 2 carries. We've got a straight-up locked-in rusher here, and I think what makes the difference is you've got the Breakers favored in an awesome matchup. Collins is an underdog here, so target floor is still there. Again, 9 targets. He led the team in targets. The floor is still solid, but maybe you just don't have as much touchdown equity with Collins because the team is projected to lose this game. The pass catching core here is a little bit trickier. We saw John Franklin inactive last week. He's your most expensive player. I'll just talk about the guys that were active. There was a team lead for targets between Ryan McDaniel and J.J. Wilson. Those 2 guys are both dirt cheap. They both had 6 targets. McDaniel caught 4. Wilson only caught 2. But I think these are players we should be considering right away due to pricing. You know, if you want to play Anthony Jones, Jonathan Adams, Johnny Dixon, Alex Collins, a stud QB, you're going to need somebody down in this price range. And McDaniel, 6 targets makes sense. Derek Dillon at 4.3K. He was the team's leading receiver last year, had 4 targets. And he's clearly a priority because he also got a carry in the run game. I think better days are ahead for Derek Dillon. Rashard Davis, I think, is probably their wide receiver 3, only 3 targets for him. This team, like last year, did rotate receivers. They didn't rotate to the same degree. We saw a bit of a cameo performance from Vinny Papali. Osiris Mitchell came over. He failed to catch his only target. And J.J. Wilson did rotate with Daniel Helm at tight end. So this isn't like the Breakers where it's locked in. You're going to see the same guys every single snap. But the pricing is much, much different here. All these receivers are cheap, so I think you can throw some darts, especially this game is an awesome total, so I'm going to be looking for a run back, potentially when I'm using a Stallion. Getting to the other side of this game, we've got Birmingham, massive team total here, something we definitely want to target. And this team was really interesting this week. So they just put Jamar Smith on injured reserve, got this news right before the show started. I think that opens up Alex Magoo as the best quarterback play on the board. But before we get there, this team was the champion last year. The Stallions won their week 1 game against the Generals 27-10. Similar game plan to last year. They were one of the run-heavier teams. They were one of the slower teams. Their defense looked pretty decent, except for their ground game. They did allow 6.4 yards per attempt to the Generals, who are a run-based team. But outgained them in terms of yard per play. They won the turnover battle. But this game could have been much closer. I mentioned the score. They won 27-10. I went back and looked at New Jersey. My gosh, they turned the ball over twice. They had 3 turnover on downs, one at the Birmingham 25, one at the 10, and one at the 1. I mean, even if you just get a score on one of those, it's 27-17, and God forbid 2, and it's a 3-point game. So, I mean, this game looks lopsided, but it was close. Anyway, back to Magoo. Jamar Smith is out. He has a finger injury, which brought him out of the game, honestly, in their last game. But Magoo, decent passing numbers for him, 64% completion, 6.2 yards per attempt, and he has elite rushing ability. 6 rushes, 51 yards. This guy can run. So he immediately vaults guys like Bethel Thompson because the floor is higher. The team total here is solid. The receivers are playable. Magoo stands out as the number 1 quarterback at this point on the week. The backfield was a surprise. I think a lot of people assumed that Bo Scarborough would come in and handle most of the work, but he did not play a lot. They used CJ Marable ahead of him. Now, Marable only had 9 carries, and he notched 24 rushing yards, so it wasn't great, but he had 4 targets. Scarborough only carried twice and had 1 target, and snaps reflect this. This was the CJ Marable show. It's still a situation to monitor. Scarborough was the guy at the end of last year, but the backfield honestly might have flipped. GPP only for me. At receiver, this team lost their top option in Marlon Williams. That's a big blow to them. They were using him like Deebo Samuel. Next, they had Davion Davis with 4 targets. Myron Mitchell had 3 targets. Michael Darius, he had 1 catch on 2 targets. Jay Sternberger actually led the team, and he caught 5 targets for 62 yards in the score. Jay Sternberger was awesome, and he's a guy they used a ton. His snap share was better than a lot of the receivers. He was lining up in and out of the slot. And some of you may be curious. You're like, oh, how does this guy have snaps and route shares? I went out and I charted every individual game. So those of you that are subscribers, you will have access to the snap shares, the route shares that these teams are using for these players, which can be very important, especially when we're talking about thin margins and trying to figure out who's stepping up for an injured Marlon Williams, who maybe is a buy low, ran a lot of routes, but didn't capitalize on the targets. We'll have that information. So again, get 50% off your first week with any Stochastic DFS package. Links in the video description below. The deal is on the banner. This is a league with very little information, so take advantage of that. But I do think Jay Sternberger firmly going to be the wide receiver 1 here. We just need to see who steps up in place of Marlon Williams now, because he was their gadget guy. They didn't really have anyone else use this role once he got hurt. You had a bunch of boundary receivers in Mitchell and Davis and Deion Cannon Watkins. Michael Darius was pretty much a slot receiver, but they went out inside LaMichael Petway. They also put their fullback, tight end hybrid Bobby Holly on injured reserve. So right away, I think Jay Sternberger stands out as a player price adjusted that we want to get to, and he's probably going to be the preferred stacking option with Magoo here. And from there, I'll take shots on guys like Austin Watkins in particular, 3.6K. He played quite a bit. And that'll do it for this game. So we'll head to the next game, New Jersey taking on Pittsburgh. We just talked about New Jersey a lot in proxy with the Birmingham Stallions and how they should have been much closer. So I won't belabor that again. 3 turnover on downs in really crucial parts of the field, couple turnovers. But this team's still good. They were second in plays. They passed 50% of the time, which was a little higher than I expected. But I think this team is going to continue platooning their quarterbacks. Last year, they did it with DeAndre Johnson and Luis Perez. This year, they're doing it with Dakota Prukop. We didn't get to see a ton of. Honestly, the game kind of got out of hand when Prukop came in. But he played awesome. 76% completion, 8.7 yards per attempt. He can run a little bit. He had 4 rush attempts. Johnson rushed 7 times for 45 yards, so he's still very much in play. Johnson had the bad end of like a bunch of drops from his receivers, only a 31% completion, 2.2 yards per attempt. Remember, last year, Johnson led the league in both those categories, so I'm not selling Johnson at this point. All this to say, I think because of the drops and such, Johnson's still a buy low, but can you actually really buy him for DFS in a timeshare with Prukop? I don't think so. I'm probably playing Magoo, Bethel Thompson, and some of the other signal callers. They're just going to rotate, and I don't see this changing anytime soon, similar to last year. The backfield for this team was interesting. I mean, another assumption people made, I did too incorrectly. I played Darius Victor in cash, and here's why. They ruled Trey Williams out. Previously, they had operated in a 50-50 committee. And Kingston Davis barely touched the ball last year, so I assumed it was going to be the Darius Victor show. It wasn't. It was about a 50-50 timeshare between the two, but that was pretty dumb by them. Victor ran laps around Davis efficiency-wise. 8 carries, 84 yards. Kingston had 8 carries for 36 yards, both players with 1 target. I'd like to see Victor more involved. I think he's a potential buy low in tournaments, but this is one I'm going to have to wait on ownership and see what other people are saying around the industry, because last week Victor was very popular. If he's very popular again and Kingston's as involved, this is a situation I probably want to sell. However, if people are off Victor, I might buy a little bit in tournaments. We'll see here. This is an elite rushing attack that we do want pieces of. Receiving game. First things first, DeMornay Pierson-El went down late in this game with a non-contact injury. I haven't seen any update on his status. So this is an injury report situation you guys are going to have to watch. See what DeMornay Pierson-El status is, because this could really condense what the Generals are forced to do at receiver. And they have a good team total this week over Pittsburgh, so we want to target some of them. Cam Eccles-Looper led the team with 5 receptions. He also had a pair of carries. He was very clearly a priority for this team. I think he should be tentatively viewed as the wide receiver 1. They're using him in a gadget role. And if you remember, this is the team that had Cavante Turpin last year. He's not Turpin as a talent, but if he's going to get those carries and easy targets coming out of the slot, which is where he played, I think Eccles-Looper is the guy I'm going to be using as receiver here. They rotated tight ends. You actually saw 3 of them, really, but Bowman had 6 targets. That was a ton for him. Woody Brandon went catchless on his only target. So Bowman seems to be the priority among the tight ends, but I think that probably evens out a little bit over time. Randy Satterfield and Alonzo Moore each had 4 targets. I think your main 3 wide receivers at this point are going to be Eccles-Looper, Satterfield, and Alonzo Moore, with, again, Eccles playing in the slot, which is the role we probably want to get the most of here. But you'll see Satterfield and Alonzo pop up. I would have more interest in Satterfield at his price comparatively, but again, Eccles-Looper being so cheap is where I really would prefer to take my pass catching shots. Going to Pittsburgh, so I haven't watched this game yet. It'll come up later for me in the next couple days to get the snaps and the routes, but I can talk to you a lot about it. I think this was one of the worst showings by any offense to start the year. They played both James Morgan and Troy Williams. This team ran 47 plays. That was last. They didn't pass a ton, but they were also getting slaughtered. They only averaged 3.3 yards per play. Their defensive line was actually really good. They had 4 sacks. At one point in time, New Orleans had to put 6 linemen on the field, but their offensive line played pretty decent too. Their runners were just so bad. Ultimately, quarterback hampered them quite a bit. James Morgan and Troy Williams both played. Neither of them completed more than 40% of their passes in 4 yards per attempt. Williams was even worse than that. Neither of them run. They played the Breakers. That's the best defense in this league, at least on paper. So the better days will be ahead, but no clarity on the starter, no efficiency whatsoever. Stay away from this situation. Forgot. Yeah, there we go. The backfield's also the worst in the league, and not because it was inefficient. That was true, but this is one of the few backfields that played 3 guys and almost played them in an even committee. Dwayne Gary, Madria London, and Garrett Groshek, basically even workloads. They were all horrible. Again, good defense on the other side, but even if they played a weak defense, do you want to take a 3-way committee when you have Alex Collins, Anthony Jones, even Bo Scarborough, CJ Marable? You can take shots on 2-man backfields. You don't have to mess with 3-man backfields on arguably the worst team. The receiving room, I will say, was basically what we expected. It's just the quarterback play was so inefficient that we couldn't really get anything out of it. I mean, Trey Walker and Bailey Gaither, both 7 targets. That's about what we expected. Isaiah Henney was the 3. He had 4 targets. Now, he didn't catch any of them, but he still was the 3. Tight end Artavius Lynn caught 4 or 5 targets. And it looks like Samson Nahua is going to be the rotational 4, but man, these are one-off situations only at this point. I highly doubt I'll be stacking Pittsburgh. But going back to week 1, it's basically exactly what we thought at receiver, assuming they don't make a change. Going to our final game, we have Michigan taking on Philadelphia. This should be a fun one. And right away, we'll start with the Michigan side. This team was 2-8 last year, underwent a coaching change, and they played the Gamblers week 1, dominated yards per play, dominated the score. They did run 5th most plays. They passed 50% of the time. That was tied for 6th. Defense was very good here, top 3 in both yards per attempt allowed through the air and on the ground. Good sack numbers for them, strong trench play. They played Houston, who again shot themselves in the foot with a bunch of dumb turnovers. But overall, I think this team was the rightful winner in this game. And they had ridiculous quarterback numbers. There were only 2 incomplete passes out of, let's see here, 25 pass attempts all day. Josh Love, 90% completion, 10.8 yards per attempt. Carson Strong completed all 5 of his passes for 34 yards. He basically just checked it down every play. Love was impressive, though, driving the ball downfield. And once he did so, they used him basically as the full-time starter. Only a couple cameo performances from Strong. I think Love is usable here. I might sell a little bit with that Houston pass defense just being so bad. If Love is owned, I'm going to play guys like Magoo and Bethel Thompson instead. But Love, man, awesome performance week 1. The backfield was basically what we expected. It was a split almost evenly between Stevie Scott and Reggie Corbin. I'll take shots on this backfield. It's been productive. This is much better and more enticing than taking like a shot on the 3-way committee for Pittsburgh. Just know like the 2 best players at the positions are probably going to be some combination of Jones and Alex Collins. So when you take shots on the 2-man backfields, that should be focused on tournaments. But Corbin, 9 carries. Stevie Scott, 12 carries. Stevie Scott got off to a red-hot start. He's also slightly bigger. Last year, Corbin was more efficient, so I'm not sure what to make of the small sample, but anticipating a 50-50 committee. At receiver, Joe Walker looks firmly in place as the number 1. This is a game I already charted. He's locked in number 1. 6 catches, 105 yards, and 7 targets. I think right behind him, you're going to see Ishmael Hyman as the 2 and Trey Quinn as the rotational 3. They use a bunch of 2 and 3 tight end sets. So Marcus Ball and Cole Hicatini sometimes will take Trey Quinn off the field. But Trey Quinn plays more snaps than any other receiver. Marcus Sims is kind of the rotational 4. But I'm firmly going to be playing Joe Walker and Hyman in stacks, mixing in Trey Quinn because he's so cheap. Doesn't really matter if he doesn't have a full snap share. Getting to our final team, Philadelphia, the Stars. Fun team here. A lot of continuity from last year. They played in week 1 in a game again where they did not win yards per play, but still won the final score over Memphis. They still ran their air raid, 3rd in plays, 4th in pass rate. They were winning a lot of the games, so I anticipate that going up near tops of the league. The defense showed some improvement, but not a ton. 4th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 7th in yards per attempt allowed on the ground. Offensive line play was still bad here. 5 sacks allowed, 0 generated. And last year, if you remember, this was a shootout team. They had to outscore their opponents because their defense was really bad. I think that's probably the case again this year. They look slightly improved, but not a ton. Backfield was split almost evenly between Matt Colburn and Dexter Williams. I don't really see this changing too much. Dexter Williams was actually woefully inefficient. He only had 11 yards on 9 carries. He did have 3 targets, which is positive, but Colburn was more efficient. Only 5 carries, 30 yards, 4 targets for him. I think Colburn tentatively is going to be your pass catching back, but I wouldn't be surprised if this continues, the inefficiency from Williams, he just works his way ahead. Wouldn't be surprising at all. Receiver, I need to chart this game, and this is the one that is the most important to date. We saw Devin Gray lead the team with 7 catches. He had 9 targets, so he's tentatively the 1. Corey Coleman came in as the 2. He had 4 targets, caught all 4 of them. Chris Rowland also had 4 targets, 3 catches, but he also carried the ball 3 times, which we've seen him in that gadget role before. What I expected was Jordan Sewell to play a ton of snaps, but Jordan Sewell only had 1 target. DeAndre Overton actually had 3. Now, this could be noisy, and which is why I need to go in and look at the snaps and the routes, but I'm very curious who actually had more routes between Overton and Sewell. Right now, I'm just far more willing to play Overton at 3.1K compared to 8.8 for Sewell. And to sum all this up, Sewell, I think, is a guy we can sell on pending this route rate. I'm going to go in and dig into this and have it in writing. I'll probably tweet it out before the weekend starts, but Gray looks like the wide receiver 1, and he's extremely affordable. Rowland plays that gadget role, extremely affordable. Even Corey Coleman, I would rather play than Sewell right now. And Overton, I think you could certainly throw shots on. Pro Wells was the tight end, but they don't use the tight end on all of their snaps. So that is what it is. I think we can really focus on Gray, Coleman, Rowland, Overton to sum up this offense. But that'll do it for us today. Let me know in the comment section what you think of the video. Check out our package, 50% off again your first week. It's so you can take advantage of all the information we have on USFL DFS. If you'd like to reach out on Twitter, I'm at Matt_Gajewski. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you again next week. See ya, everyone.